All right, this is a small excerpt from the Joint House Inquiry, which Shelby is interviewing Dale Watson of the FBI. Let's see what happens.
Senator Shelby. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 5 minutes is not a lot. Mr. Watson, Mr.
Oops, sorry.
Black, I want to join the chorus that I appreciate what you've done and what you will do. Mr. Watson and I go back a while. He referenced my home state of Birmingham. He spent some time there as a young FBI agent. He even mentioned my hometown of Tuscaloosa, Alabama. He knows a lot about that area. He knows a lot of those agents. I was a U.S. magistrate before he got here. I'm a little older, you know, Dale. But to both of you, we do appreciate what you do, and we appreciate the CIA and the FBI.
Well, not so much the CIA. Look, the CIA would intentionally withheld information from the FBI regarding Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi at the Malaysia summit meeting, and also while they were inside the United States possessing dual U.S. visas. Yeah, I'm sorry.
We're trying to do
Nothing
is find out how we can help you to function better. If you put it in that context, with more funds, with maybe more oversight, but not micromanagement, I think is there. Mr. Watson?
Oh, well, listen, the problem here was not sharing information, whether it was done on purpose or not, right? In this case, in regards to what I just said about Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi, that was intentional, and that came from Tenet, the DCI, right? He has. I mean, I did a podcast with Carl Levin from the Joint House Inquiry, this inquiry, where he's interviewing George Tenet, Cofer Black, and Tom Wilshire, who's the deputy chief of the, who's chief of a deputy chief of Alex Station, and they all gave conflicting answers, but there was a similar theme that the FBI knew. No, they didn't know. They had no idea, because if they did, they would have been monitoring both men as soon as they entered the United States in January of 2000. That's a fact. And the fact that the CIA basically told the CIA officers from the Counterterrorism Center, who went and met with the FBI, and his name is Clark Shannon, he told the Joint Inquiry that he was not to share information about who he showed the FBI photographs to, about who the men were, on orders from from the DCI. And Tenet basically said, we never told him that. So in other words, a case officer like Clark Shannon and George Tenet both gave conflicting answers.
And a few
Someone's lying. I have to believe Clark Shannon.
questions. First to you. You said the light, I believe this was the phrase, the light came on for me in 1998. Why didn't the light come on in 1993? When did you go and become head of the terrorism section of the FBI?
And the section is 1997.
97.
Came
So
over
you were
from
not
the-
there in 93.
In
I mean, you were at the
93, I was
FBI,
in-
but you were not
yes,
the head.
I was in the Iranian unit at the time.
Yes, sir.
And then left and went to Kansas
Yes, sir.
City in 94.
But what?
Right. Listen, most people were especially the Department of Justice at the time, in the very late 80s, early 90s, were concentrating on Hezbollah, which wasn't a threat inside the United States. They were a threat to U.S. interests outside the United States. And that's coming from air piracy, hijackings, right? Imad Mughniya, Nabil El-Berri, God's sakes. I mean, Nelson Martins does DJ Thrones detonates the authority on this. But Abu Nidal and the A&O, Abu Nidal organization. But there wasn't a radical fundamentalist unit at the time before the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. They had a joint terrorism task force, and that started in 1980, but they were concentrating on issues like the Iranians and the um, Syrians, Jordanians, and what have you. There was no radical fundamentalist unit because there was no such thing as a radical fundamentalist group or organization. Al Qaeda and all these other terrorist groups we see today, they didn't exist until I want to say 96. Before that, Al Qaeda wasn't really, uh, didn't have much in the way of goals in terms of, or agendas outlined yet. I mean, I think during about 1993, when they entered the Sudan, that's when the Egyptian Islamic Jihad under Ayman al-Zawahiri and Abu Hafs al-Masri and Abu Ubaidah al-Banshiri and those guys called the Takfiris, which label other Muslims as apostates, started persuading bin Laden to use his group of the Mujahideen fighters from the Arab camp in Masada to turn it into a global terrorism network. And the FBI after 1993, I mean, still didn't have enough manpower. John Antoselv, Louis Napoli, Frank Pellegrino, Dan Clunan, Jack Clunan, Dan Coleman. You know, these guys are, you know, they were few and very not many people were interested. In fact, there was a fireman by the name of Ronald Bucca from Manhattan, who basically, on his own, did an independent investigation about a wider Arab terrorist network. And he went to the trial of Ramzi Youssef, the suspect in the convicted suspect in the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. And through him, he basically created a map and kept like this small written database. I mean, there was no computers back then, but he had like a catalog of names and peoples and dates, and he made his own map. And the book I would recommend learning more about that is 1,000 Years for Revenge by Peter Lance.
What's troubling
That's a great book, one of the best books I've ever read, period.
to me and perhaps others is we had the first hit on the World Trade Tower in 93.
But just also mention too, after 1993, after the World Trade Center bombing in 93, even after the arrest of El Said Nusayr in the assassination of Rabbi Meir Kahane, which he got off for, but he was convicted on the gun charge, because that was considered the first terrorist attack, Arab fundamentalist. People tend to forget that. The FBI, James Fox, went on national media and said the threat is over. There is no wide network of Arab fundamentalism. You wouldn't think that when the evidence was collected by, when they arrested El Said Nusayr, went to his apartment in Jersey and went to a Brooklyn apartment with Mohammed Salame, the guy who rented the Ryder truck to use to transport the bomb in the World Trade Center. All these documents were, you know, military documents and guerrilla training documents, which were left there by Ali Muhammad at El Said Nosair's apartment, would be quite alarming about, hey, wait a minute, we need to look into this. But Ali Muhammad was protected by the FBI and the CIA because he was an informant, as well as being a loyalist to Osama bin Laden and Omar Abdul Rahman
Well, you were involved,
of the landmarks bombing plot, Rahman.
all
Yes,
of
sir.
you were, in the investigation. And then in, was it 96, we had the Prince Sultan barracks were hit, and then
Khobar.
Khobar Towers, we worked with you on that,
That's right.
that time. And then in
With the Khobar Towers bombing, the FBI actually went to investigate that. And the director at the time was Louis Freeh, who was friends with the GID director, Prince Turki bin Faisal. And the Saudis basically obstructed that case because they arrested a bunch of people who probably weren't even involved, and they forced confessions out of them, and they executed them right away. And the FBI wouldn't, and the Saudis wouldn't let the FBI interview neighbors nearby, or anybody else for that matter. And Louis Freeh basically shut down the case.
In 98, our embassies were hit simultaneously in Tanzania and Kenya. You
Right.
worked on that.
Yes, sir.
And then in late 2000, the USS Cole, which my colleague Senator Roberts has spent a lot of time on, and all of us have too. So it was 98. You'd been in your present job as the head of that, what, a few months?
Yes, sir, a year and a half.
So you became aware of this was a serious.
No, sir. That's not
Okay.
what the light came on about.
Okay, explain it, Ted.
Okay, I'll
Explain
be
it.
glad to, and I hope I'll be.
Okay.
I'm sorry if you were confused about it.
No.
What the light came on
No,
was.
they were your words.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe my words without the proper
Yeah, go ahead and explain.
explanation. What came on, as the light came on to me, was that we were very reactive. And it was clear that the FBI was being very reactive. It had nothing to do with Osama bin Laden a threat, or was Hezbollah a threat. We all knew that. We were all working in that.
Okay.
But our mentality was pointed at being very reactive. And the crucial piece was, I came to realize that we probably will never stop all acts of terrorists. And the only way we could look at this and feel good about ourselves, if that's the right term to use, is to raise our capacity. That's what I meant when the light came on, not the fact that there were threats out there.
No, I think what inhibited the FBI was a lack of personnel dedicated to Arab fundamentalism, because they didn't have the resources or the support for resources from the budget offices of the FBI, and that wasn't replenished with, like, in other words, they couldn't take away from other offices dedicated to La Cosa Nostra or the drug cartels, or, because that was more important at the time. In the early 90s, the FBI basically was just left with an incomplete office dedicated to the terrorism threat. And basically, when I told you about James Fox, when he said, "Oh, after these arrests, we don't have an Arab fundamentalism problem." I mean, even a fireman from Manhattan knew that there was a bigger problem at hand. And, this would really undermine the FBI, because they don't want to get egg on their face and say, "Hey, we were wrong," right? But by the mid 1990s, when the I-49 unit, especially that unit was made, I think, in late '98. The I-49 unit was dedicated to the Bin Laden, Al Qaeda, and when they asked the CIA about, "What do you know about this Bin Laden guy?" and they brought over files and files of this guy in hand trucks, and the CIA was well aware of this guy, as probably going back to the Afghan-Soviet War. So, and that, I don't know, I would say probably by about 85, 86, because they made Al Qaeda, according to these documents called the Harmony documents. It's alleged that Al Qaeda was formed in 1987, 88, from a camp in the Paktia province of Afghanistan, which was the Al Masada base. That's why Al Qaeda is called the base, because it comes from Al Masada training base, in which they trained Arabs in guerrilla warfare. And, the Arabs weren't allowed to have their own training bases, but Bin Laden was respected because he was spending millions and millions of dollars from his father's construction company, the Saudi Bin Laden Group, to build roads and ditches for the Afghan Mujahideen. And there were very few Afghans that were accepting of Arabs in their training bases, for the exception of people like Abdul Rasul Sayaf and Jalaluddin Haqqani. So Bin Laden made his own base, but he had to get permission. And so that's what Al Qaeda was from. And so the FBI, I would have to say, I give them the excuse that from the mid 1990s, they were not well equipped to handle the problem. But it wasn't like they weren't aware. That to me is a little bit problematic, because those warning signs were there in the early 1990s. I mean, you have Ayman al-Zawahiri. He visited the United States in the very early 90s about fundraising for the Afghan Soviet War. So did Abdul Azam. from the Maktab al-Kidmat. And it's alleged back in 1987, Osama bin Laden actually visited Indianapolis to watch an Abdullah Azam lecture at this very large Islamic youth function.
My
So take that for what you will.
colleague just a few minutes ago, I believe he used the phrase, trying to dig it out, scope. I think he used the scope of the challenge presented by the terrorists. Was that really comprehended by the FBI and the CIA at that time? Because I think that is a very, very good question he's asked. Was the scope of the terrorist threat appreciated early on, or prior to September the 11th?
Absolutely. And there were a few people that got it, so to speak. We knew, and within the FBI, and particularly Mike Rollins, the section chief that worked for me, we knew exactly what the scope of the problem was. And if you talk to the folks at the CIA, they knew exactly what the scope of the problem was. And if you talk to representatives up at the NSC, they understood what the scope of the problem was. If there was a breakdown, it's not with those three individuals, but if there was a breakdown, it was where we were at U.S. government-wise, policy-wise, will of the American people. Did they understand the scope? Did you, I mean, I'll leave it at that.
Well, look, I mean, after 9/11, the Office of the Inspector General of the FBI basically wrote a report regarding what the FBI knew and what they didn't know, and it was called, and I'll just share the screen with you. It's called a review of the FBI's handling of intelligence information related to the September 11th attacks. I'm going to link this to the description box so you can read it. And it goes to show that the FBI basically didn't get any help from the CIA, but they lambasted the FBI for mishandling information prior to 9/11. I think it was basically quite irresponsible of the Inspector General to do this in regards to the mishandling of information. That wasn't an FBI problem. That's a CIA problem. That was an NSA problem. The NSA and the CIA had so much metadata, and I've done, I don't know how many countless videos about this, pre-9/11. I'm not talking about after 9/11. I'm talking about pre-9/11 here. The FBI is really the least of the agencies here, right? Because the NSA had a wiretap on bin Laden's satellite phone. They also had a wiretap in the Yemen hub where Al-Qaeda, which was the Al-Qaeda communications hub in the capital of Sana'a, Yemen, right? In Yemen. All right, so they had that. For years, they had this wiretap going, right? The CIA basically had a bug inside the house of the Yemen hub, and they were in charge of the Yemen hub operation. They had data too, and they were getting data from abroad, from Malaysian authorities about who's coming in and out of this high-level Al-Qaeda meeting, and they didn't share this information with the FBI. The FBI basically had to shoot in the dark about where these guys were. And when they were inside the United States, the 9/11 hijackers, Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi, they weren't told by the CIA. They weren't told by the NSA. Sure as heck, the Saudis and the Israelis knew. They were monitoring the Hamburg cell out east, the Israelis, the Saudis of Khalid al-Mihdhar, Nawaf al-Hazmi, and Hani Hanjour out west. And the FBI had all these warning cables, especially Ken Williams of Phoenix Memo, warning about Arab fundamentalists training at flight schools in Scottsdale. Mark Rossini, Doug Miller. Do I have to share this story again ad nauseum? They saw the cable regarding Nawaf al-Hazmi's dual U.S. visa. They saw that both men, Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Mihdhar, coming to the United States, tried to warn the FBI headquarters. CIA told them, don't share the information. Ali Muhammad, as a triple agent, Goodness gracious. I mean, yeah, the warning signs were there. And after the 1998 East Africa bombings, they had intelligence, Israeli intelligence as well, that knew about the attacks. You had this, I forgot the name of the woman. She's the ambassador of Kenya to the United States. And she said that she tried to implore the State Department about stricter security measures because there was warnings that the embassies were a target by Arab fundamentalists, and she got none. And she even wrote a report about that. It just seems that every successful terrorist attack, that there was pre-warnings, and nothing was done until after the attack was completed. I wouldn't, I don't know what to tell you, other than, there's so much blame to go around.
Did
And it starts at the top of the intelligence apparatus.
if the FBI understood the scope and the CIA understood the scope, did everybody else under the scope of what the terrorists presented as a threat and what we were up against? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, sir. Well, I don't want to speak for the agency, but that was my impression. They understood it clearly.
Look, some of the best FBI agents in New York were, I mean, in the country, let's just say across any of the agencies, including the CIA, right? The New York Counterterrorism Office was the agency in the country regarding Arab fundamentalism, the best. Okay, Frank Pellegrino, just a bright agent of New York's counterterrorism unit, and he found information linking the uncle of Ramzi Youssef, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the same one who's in Guantanamo, who was the alleged operator of 9/11, that he had a wire transfer of $5,000, I think it was $2,500 to Mohammed Salman. And that link was to, which told Pellegrino that, hey, wait a minute, there was outside influence. And he's the only agent that really knew, put two and two together, and tried chasing Khalid Sheikh Mohammed around the world. But the New York office basically said, you're chasing a ghost. And we don't want to, we're not going to support this. So his hands were tied, really. But he was right. He would turn out to be right, but who cares at this point, right? It just makes him feel worse. That's the same thing for like Mark Rossini and Doug Miller and Ed Getz, these FBI agents tasked to the Alex station, CIA's Alex station. They were right. They tried to warn the FBI, but they weren't allowed to by law. The CIA, it's CIA information. And you would think everybody would be on the same page, but they're not.
Quickly,
And so these guys like Pellegrino and them, Dan Coleman, Jack Clunan, these guys knew that there was a bigger problem, but their superiors ignored them.
Mr. Watson, my time's up, but could you describe your role either here or you can do it in a closed session if you prefer, in the internal FBI debates over whether to share FISA-obtained information with the CIA and other agencies? Did you support such sharing or oppose it?
I fully supported that position. And as a matter of fact,
What was your role in that? Do you have a
if you're
central
talking
role?
about a specific incident, we need to talk about that in closed session. If you're talking generically, we had a pilot
Speak
project.
generically first.
Okay.
And we'll
We
get
had a
into the
pilot project
specifics
probably back to 1999, and I think that's the right time where we were offering raw FISA data to CIA folks to come in and look at, because they could probably mine intelligence bits of information out. There was a lot of resistance from that.
But it's very important that you share that with them, was it?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. For
Right now, okay, that's the end of the video. But I mean, look, again, the FBI is willing to share information with the CIA, but that wasn't the other way around, right? So, in regards to the FISA information, which is Foreign Intelligence Act, um, regarding, let's say, for the example of Zacharias Moussaoui, um, and that case details out of Minnesota, right? So the FBI there, the arresting agent was Harry Salmon. He detained Zacharias Moussaoui and Hussein Al-Attas after they inquired about these really suspicious questions about flight training. And so the flight trainers called the FBI. They went to the hotel they were staying at, and they found it to be too suspicious, to say the least. And they tried to get a FISA warrant because these are foreign nationals; they're not U.S. citizens. And the radical fundamentalist unit in the FBI, Minnesota FBI unit, they basically said that no, this doesn't meet the definitions. There was an argument between the FBI's counterterrorism unit and the radical fundamentalist unit, and they didn't get the warrant. But if they did, they probably could have stopped part of 9/11 because inside the laptop that Moussaoui had was crop dusting planes, certain names and dates, and it was a mess. But the superiors of the FBI, there's such a disconnect between the bureaucrats of the CIA, of the NSA, of the FBI, and the foot soldiers, the flatfoots, the guys who do the work. These guys have never risen up to station chiefs or the directors or the assistant director or the acting director. Those guys are from, Quantico and Yale, the brown nosers. They don't go in the streets. They stay in the office. And to, talk about, because I mentioned earlier about the FBI not having the proper manpower regarding the counterterrorism office. Now, what I'm going to show you is a portion of the Joint House Inquiry Report that details personal concerns at the FBI. And I think this is important. I'd like to read to you regarding this. The FBI labored under a hiring freeze in the last years of the Clinton administration. As a result, it did not train new agents, according to an interview with former Director Freeh. Although FBI full-time equivalent work years on international terrorism doubled from 1993 to 98, they fell on remained constant from 1999 to September 2001, according to FBI information. That information also shows that actual work years of agents and support personnel in the field grew from 482 in 1993 to 1,034 in 2000. Despite this dramatic increase, FBI officials claimed they did not receive enough resources to manage the emerging threat. A summary of FBI requests for additional personnel for counterterrorism and the responses from the Department of Justice, Office of Management and Budget, and Congress is presented in chart 1.6. Now, obviously, this is something I mentioned in the video just now about the rise of the counterterrorism unit and, of course, the implementation of the I-49 unit in 1998, 99. Yeah, there was an interest. But as you'll see on the next page, right? Let me blow this up a little bit. Now, let me shorten myself. Now, chart 1.6 demonstrates that FBI requests for additional personnel were cut or rejected at times by the Department of Justice, the Office of Management and Budget, and the Congress. Sometimes the Bureau received most of its initial request, and its request was exceeded in one instance. Former OMB officials noted in joint inquiry interviews that it was rare for any agency to receive more than its initial request during a time of budget stringency. Yeah, that's because these people at the bureaucracy, they get more than the foot soldiers. And also this money is disseminated to other areas of the FBI. We're all asking for budgets. We need to build here, we need to build there. So in other words, what I'm trying to tell you, they still didn't take the threat of Arab terrorism seriously even after the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. They also pointed out that while the FBI often did not receive additional personnel for counterterrorism, many other agencies faced significant cuts, especially the CIA. And I was made aware from a book called Jawbreaker, written by Gary Bernstein, a former CIA field officer who was in charge of the operation to capture or kill bin Laden in Afghanistan at Tora Bora in 2001. He basically said that George Tenet, during the late 1990s, made a significant cut in the fields of the CIA. And that's basically because he said that there was a huge disparity between management and the field officers. And he was a management guy. He didn't give a damn about field officers. Now, this part is counterterrorism, the competition for scarce resources. This is important. Because intelligence budgets were shrinking while counterterrorism resources were steadily growing, senior policy and intelligence officials were reluctant to make the additional cuts in other programs, like I mentioned before, that would have been necessary to augment counterterrorism programs further. This would have jeopardized their ability to satisfy other collection priorities within the intelligence community. However, with the CIA, there was no other bigger operation than the bin Laden unit. That's the same thing with the NSA, because by the mid-1990s, even in 1998, Tenet declares war. And as you could see, as Director of Central Intelligence, George Tenet testified, as I declared war in Al-Qaeda in 98, in the aftermath of the East Africa bombings, we were in our fifth year of round-the-clock support to Operation Southern Watch in Iraq. Just 3 months earlier, we were embroiled in answering questions on the India and Pakistan nuclear tests and trying to determine how we could surge more people to understanding and countering weapons of mass destruction proliferation. In early 1999, we surged more than 800 analysts and redirected collection assets from across the intelligence community to support the NATO bombing campaign against the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. Now, let me read here. Similarly, NSA Director Michael Hayden testified that his energy was focused heavily on a range of regional and global issues. As FBI budget official told the Joint Inquiry that counterterrorism was not a priority for Attorney General Ashcroft before September 11, 2001, that the FBI faced pressure to make cuts in counterterrorism to satisfy the Attorney General's other priorities. Now, that's because John Ashcroft basically was echoing what the Clinton and Bush administrations were. And I think the Clinton administration basically ignored the problem of counterterrorism, while the Bush administration did the same thing and even said that it's not even important because these people were ignorant, because agencies like the NSA and the CIA were forthcoming with their information regarding generalizing CIA reports, Central Intelligence reports, and sharing all that it knew and all that it collected in the mid-90s to the FBI, to the Department of State, to the Department of Defense. And Tenet can feign ignorance on the subject. Heck, so can the NSA, but the public information, the public data suggests otherwise. They had intelligence, signals intelligence, human intelligence regarding the growing threat of the bin Laden unit. For God's sakes, the warnings were there and they suppressed it. And you have to understand that how the intelligence apparatuses work, because information is power. And that's why agencies like the CIA and the NSA hoard it.